I'd like to talk to you today about delivery models for energy access. It's not really about technology, it's about how technologies become available, how they become something that people can have and can use and can operate and can maintain. I'm going to start with what is energy access. I think you probably all think you know what energy access is, and I think you actually do know what energy access is, but I'd like to try and maybe make it a bit more explicit so we can kind of break down how that comes about and who's got it. Electricity, sort of the most obvious, the most flexible. It's the basis for communications, for information technology. It's also transferable to other kinds of energy use, but it's not actually. It's fundamental for some things, but heat is actually the most fundamental energy source. You can do without electricity if you really have to, but you can't do without heat for cooking. Now, if you've got electricity coming out of your ears, you can use electricity for cooking. But for most people, that's not really the case. The final form of energy, which you might not often think about, is, I'd like to suggest, is mechanical power. That's power in shafts, in engines, in vehicles. And this is the basis for most forms of processing and productivity, which is the foundation of sort of economic development. So I would argue when you have these three things, then you can be said to have energy access. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, I've got all of them. Electricity, I can use that. You may have gas in your house. You've probably got mechanical power in some respect. Maybe it's a drill or something, or water pumps. You don't even really think about it. In many countries, these three things are not available in any kind of quantity or quality. The big problem is, or the big issue is massive dependence among poor people on fuel wood, just coming from forests. 2.4 billion people in the world rely for their cooking fuel on fuel wood. Huge issues in terms of time lost, drudgery, waste, links with deforestation around about densely populated areas, and also safety. This is the time when women are attacked and raped in places like Darfur. The other implication of overuse or dependence on firewood is in cooking, in indoor air pollution, in smoke. So 1.4 billion people 1.4 million people every year die of smoke-related diseases. And then the last statistic I'd like to give you is relating to electricity. And electricity is obviously the most modern form of energy, and it's 1.5 billion people don't have access to any form of electricity, which means that even things as basic as lighting, safe and efficient lighting, are a non-starter. So this is the kind of scenario we're talking about. What's the problem? Why is this the case? There's a lot of different barriers to development, to increasing energy access. Many people and different agencies will bring up different ones. Governance. For a long time, a lot of donors were saying, if we could just get the governance right, if we could just sort out governance, then everything else will come into place. Or maybe it's a lack of coordination, or corruption is the issue. That's stopping power sector reform or anything happening. And they're right. That is a huge issue. Other people, particularly NGOs, put a lot of emphasis on capacity. They say there's not enough skills available. People don't know about different technologies. They don't know about how to maintain them. Standards are very variable. You don't know what you're going to get when you install a system and nothing happens. And they're right as well. Capacity and standards is a huge problem. Finance, money. Everybody thinks money's a problem. but different people have different approaches to money. They say, well, really, the money's out there. There's enough money, in fact, in the communities if you only just created some microfinance. Or some people say, well, if you just created some incentives, then the private sector would rush in to fill the gap and provide energy. And they might be right too. But then with some funding and incentives, if you haven't got good governance, then all that money just drifts away into the coffers of the corrupt. Or if you don't have any capacity, then again, that money's going to be spent on foreign specialists rather than on people who can build that up in the country. So they're right as well, rather confusingly. In development training or in development education, management and sustainability come up as key issues. Why is it not keeping going? And people talk about management models and sustainability models to try and address that. But then, if there's no incentive to keep it going, it doesn't matter how good your model is for management and sustainability. And if there's no capacity, if people don't know how to keep something going, then they're not going to be able to do that. Some people think awareness and demand is the key barrier. People who promote, for example, the Total Sanitation campaign. I don't know if anyone's aware of it. Who's heard of the Total Sanitation campaign? Oh, only a few. It's an idea that if you can just stimulate demand, if you can make people feel like they really want, in this case, sanitation, clean sanitation, then the market demand will pull the product. It doesn't matter whether or not you've got a design or some research. It's all about just if somebody really wants it, then they'll find a way. And that's considered to be the gap. And finally, technology and knowledge. Some people will say it's all about technology. It's about R&D. It's about innovation and getting it right and that knowledge getting around. But there's a lot of knowledge and technology out there as well. It's held in different people, but maybe there's no money to do it. There's no capital to install a system, or there's no capacity. People don't understand something about technology. So these are all problems. And some people will say you have to start there. And everybody, NGOs, companies, governments, donors, is looking for the entry point. What's the thing? If we can just do this, then everything else will fall into place. What I think the reality is, I don't actually think that thing exists. I think that all these things have to happen. And they'll come into being in different ways. And education has something to do with that. Health has something to do with that. But restricting myself for a moment to energy access, which is the main thing that I'm working on. And let's try and sort out one thing, if we can. Because the irony is that energy access also underpins all these things. It's hard to have coordination if you haven't got decent computers or internet systems. It's hard to have management and sustainability if you haven't got electronic records. Technology and knowledge is all sort of linked to these things. And while we don't have energy access, you can't be, the MDGs are unachievable. You can't have improved healthcare, improved levels of education, reduced levels of infant mortality without energy, whether that's in refrigerating vaccines or whether it's in just people having more time because they're not collecting firewood in order to take care of their family or to earn some money. So how do you address these things for energy access? What I would argue is that the way that you do it, whether you're a company or an NGO, is that you come up with a model. You come up with a delivery model which you think is going to address these or work within the context of these barriers where it is that you're going to operate. So if you think that there's endemic corruption, you're not going to propose a model which involves a lot of emphasis on government systems, for example. Or if you think there's a situation where there's just no incentive to go there, you're not going to pick up a private sector only approach, because that's not going to work. So there's a whole load of different delivery models been proposed which address a range of these barriers. I'd like to talk about a few of them and then try and start to compare them. So electricity concessions. So concessions is a nice way of saying that the government is going to say, right, okay, company, you operate that system, you've got this area, these households, go and provide it. But actually what we have in this country for distribution and transmission of electricity. But we don't have this system for generation and supply, because it doesn't seem to work so well. So you say, well, hold on a minute. So concessions maybe works for one thing, but not for something else. And so this is also, it's a very much a private sector approach. You think, oh, great, so the private sector is doing it for us. And you look at it and say, well, hold on. Most of these companies that have the concessions are former public utilities. So they've got their knowledge and their capacity from being public, and now they're private. So it isn't just as simple as, okay, concessions, we can have that. If there isn't already a series of companies in place which were formerly public utilities, probably. Then you've got energy equipment retailers. This is somebody like a solar lantern manufacturer. So they're saying, look, we've got a product. We can cut through all this rubbish with governance and with utilities. We're just going to work on producing a really good solar lantern product. But the question then becomes, well, a solar lantern, is that's just meeting a lighting need. What about heat and mechanical power? What about a bit more electricity, so you can use a toaster or something, or rather than just a light? So they have their sort of place, and they are providing a service. But they're, again, they have their own niche. It fits for a product. It doesn't fit for a system. So okay, so what else do we have? Oh, energy service companies, ESCOs. That's something that's been quite a popular concept. Quite a lot of people have said, yeah, this is better. There's an incentive here. The company's selling energy. It's a services company, and it's going to get money back when it provides energy. It's got an incentive to keep maintenance going. This sounds good. But then also, they're very much private, and they need an incentive to go into poor communities, because there's just not enough money there to make it worth their while. So you ask yourself, what's the ESCO model? And you only get part of an answer, because other things are going on. Then you've got community cooperative models. The USA, the rural electrification in the USA was achieved through community cooperative models. Not something you hear a lot of in the land of private sector and capitalism. It was done through community cooperatives. That might work in some places, but does that only work for electricity? Or does that also work for cooking fuel or something? In Practical Action's done a lot of work with the small enterprise management model. This is one which involves helping small enterprises come out of communities to manage the systems that are being used, which is great in its own way. But does that only apply to decentralized systems like hydro? Energy consumer companies are another one. And then they're a bit like electricity consumer societies, which are a bit more democratic. And then you've got local electricity retailers, and then you've got decentralized virtual utilities, and then you've got more of them, rural electrification companies, association models, I don't even know what that is, community shareholder models. And like, oh, bloody hell, there's loads of these. And so the question becomes, if you're coming into this sector, you try to design a project, you're trying to create energy access, what on earth, which one of these is better? And the first problem is, you can't even really tell what is the difference between them. You can't compare them, because they all have components which are visible. So somebody says, I want to do the Cellco model. The Cellco model of solar photovoltaic is great. What is that? Well, it's a private company selling solar panels. So you say, well, does that only apply to solar panels? Can I do that with something else? Does that only work if you're in an area with good education? Or can I do that in somewhere where it's not? What we've been trying to do is try and make some sense of these models, and try and make them a bit more comparable, and a bit more structured. I'm going to quickly describe where we are with this in terms of delivery models and the codification of delivery models. To start with, we've said, okay, there's always a basic model. There's always a basic model, which is who's the user, starting with the user, and then moving on to the use. What kind of electricity or what kind of energy use is it? Is it electricity? Is it heat? Is it mechanical power? Then we look at what the vector is. What kind of is it solid? Is it liquid? Is it gas? Is it electricity? And then we look at the delivery system. Is it standalone? Is it a decentralized system, or is it a grid, or is it a commodity market? And that, I think, that gives you a starting point to see that's the basic system. And once you know those things, you can start to see, well, obviously it's a commodity-based system, so you can't have community management. Or you can say, well, it's a solid fuel, so you know it's not going to be moving around in a grid. So we're trying to do things like that to start a codification. And then the next set of information is about the energy equipment. In order to have energy access, I would argue that you need three things. You need the energy itself, the fuel. You need some energy equipment, some equipment to convert the fuel into what you want. So generator, wires, all sorts of things. And then you need an appliance, which is the thing that you use the energy in. And you have to have all three of those things. If you're doing a solar project, you don't need the fuel because the fuel is coming out of the air. But you still need the appliance and the energy equipment. Hydro is similar. If you're doing a diesel generator, you need diesel, you need a generator, and you need your appliances. So the energy equipment is very important. And a lot of projects focus on the energy equipment. They're energy equipment projects. They're hydro schemes, or they're solar schemes. In this section, a lot of emphasis goes on this bit of the model. They say, well, we're using a microfinance model. Okay, great. So you're giving someone a loan in order to get them energy equipment. Fine. But then, who owns the equipment? People don't always want to own the equipment. It could easily be somebody in the value chain. Who maintains it and who finances it? Those four things are often separate, and they're often not explicit when people explain delivery models. The next point is energy resource. That's where the energy is coming from. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's owned by the government, sometimes it's owned by a private company. You can never forget that element, where that is coming from. And then the appliance, as I said. Many electricity projects ignore the appliance and think that the appliance is just going to come out of thin air. Stove projects, to try and increase energy efficiency of wood use, focus only on the appliance, and they often ignore the energy resource. And the last bit is the initiative. And that's who's trying to make a change here. Now that could be an NGO trying to do some capacity building with equipment manufacturers. It could be a company trying to plug an appliance. I'll be interested to see what the next talk is about private sector. I would argue that it very much depends. There's different ways of interacting with that market, and some of them will be private and some of them may not be. Finally, this is the outcome. Once the delivery models framework that we've developed comes in the form of an online tool, and once you've completed it, you've made your selections, you've reviewed the different options at the different levels, then it will generate a kind of a prototype market map, which is what you'll eventually end up with. It's a market system. Whether it's initiated by an NGO or initiated by a government, what you eventually want is somebody receiving appliance, equipment, possibly fuel. You may need some people providing microfinance, some maintenance services, and then you may also have different things that you need to happen in the enabling environment in order for this system to work. That is a very sort of brief presentation of our approach to delivery models, and this is still in development. We have a beta version of the delivery models framework up online at this address, and if anyone, feel free to go up there, have a play, Fill in a model you might be aware of, try and design your project using it, and it will give you feedback on how that works. You can also look at a number of existing models. You can look at some of the famous energy access models and see how those have charted the path down this route. You can even plot your own energy access onto this, and that's quite an interesting experience, I can tell you. Thanks very much for your time.